Hey Refuge Church, I'm so excited to be back with you guys again, talking about Shalom and Tamim, talking about these juicy, good, hopefully healing topics that come to us this summer. So I will pray and we'll jump in. God, I pray that we would be able to get a glimpse of your character and who you are and your sweetness. I thank you that you are a good parent. You're not a neglectful parent. You're not an emotionally distant parent. You care about our well-being and our wholeness. I ask that we would be vulnerable with ourselves, our community, with you, and we might be honest to say, these are the spaces, these are the places that I need some help. I need some revivification. I thank you that you are the living water who is available free of cost to all of us. I pray that your spirit would attend to me and help me to speak well, and hopefully that your word might not come back void, but do precisely what you intended to do. Thank you for all these things in the name of your son, Jesus. Amen. All right, so Shalom and Tamim. As I mentioned in the prayer, we're defining those as well-being and wholeness. If you're not sure about that, you can go back and look at or listen to the previous sermon, number 1 in this series. I'm going to go through the etymology and why we translate it that way. Very helpful introduction. But we believe that God is not just obsessed with our performance and our accomplishments and our level of obedience, but cares about us as a good parent and desires goodness for us. The verse that I have for this week is, "For the Lord will comfort Zion. He will comfort all her waste places. He will make her wilderness like Eden and her desert like the garden of the Lord. Mirth and joy will be found in her, thanksgiving and melodious song." That is God's ultimate desire for us. It's where he wants us to be at. So this week we're going to really be careful to look at where our waste places are, where our desert might be. Eugene Peterson says that busyness is laziness. So we're going to cut out everything else. Just look at this. Hey, if this is really God's desire for me, if he really says, be whole, Genesis 17, that's his vision for us. Let's slow down and look at where we have these deserts within us, from deconstructing, from church abuse, from family drama. Use drama meaningfully there, not frivolously. Where might it be that God desires to do some mending, to do some healing, right? So what is trauma? Dr. Bruce Perry says that trauma is any event or non-event which has chemically altered the structure of our brain or the way that our brain responds to things. So an event being something that you can specifically point to and be like, this, after this point in time, I did not trust that church leader anymore. And anytime I walked into a church since then, all I can think of is these people might be hoaxes and fraudulent. That would be an event-based trauma. A non-event might be a series of microaggressions that goes your whole life that fundamentally changes the way that you're able to trust people or engage with yourself. So those are 2 examples. If the word trauma isn't helpful for you, that's also perfectly fine. You can just deal with pain, suffering, whatever. But today we're going to look through the lens of the work of Dr. Doug Shirley, what are common tendencies of what we tend to do with pain, and what are good ways to recover from trauma. And then at the end, we're going to look at that biblically and see if those line up. Spoiler alert, they do. Okay, so 4 common tendencies with pain. Dr. Doug Shirley does a lot of clinical work, specifically with church leaders who have made some egregious ethical error, and helps rehabilitate them. So his research comes out of that kind of space, just so you know. So his 4 common tendencies with pain. What do we tend to do when we feel pain? The first one is problematization, which, so that is if you're experiencing a pain, right? Maybe you are doing lots of handwriting or lots of computer work, or you're living a really sedentary lifestyle and you're having a lot of wrist pain, right, from writing or using the computer and sitting all day. And rather than experiencing that pain as a sign, as a signpost that can communicate something helpful to you, Dr. Karen David says that emotions are just data for us. It's just, oh, I'll take an Advil. Oh, I'll just have a cocktail at the end of the night, and that tends to soothe things up so I can sleep properly. That is problematization, saying this pain is a problem and I'm going to do away with it. And we do that in emotional contexts too, right? If say, oh, I'm not a fan of this feeling that I'm feeling, and so I'm just going to pull out my phone and start scrolling on Instagram, because whether I know it or not, the dopamine that I get from that bing, bing, bing covers it all up. Same as taking an Advil, right? So that is the first common use of pain. Notice, okay, where are my deserts? Where are my waste places that God wants to make a garden? Am I engaging in problematization, where I notice, oh, I'm really uncomfortable with this. I don't like this. I'm just going to numb out, right? We talked about numbing methods. Is that you? Are you engaging in any of that? Number 2, personalization. So this would be where you say, yeah, I have a lot of anxiety. It makes it hard to sleep. I have, chest pain sometimes. But that's just who I am. I come from a long line of people who overthink and overworry, and that's just who I am. Nothing we can do about it. That's a very disempowering way to look at anxiety, and sometimes it comes from having a lot of strategies that we're trying to help our anxiety. We're trying to figure it out, right? And so we can't figure it out, and so we just ascribe it to who we are and our identity. That makes sense as a strategy. And I'm so sorry if that is you and your pain, that you've made that part of you. You felt like you needed to do that. But please know that you are not your anxiety. You are not your pain. That is not the completeness of who you are. There is a possibility of you living without pain, right? God calls us into well-being and wholeness, and that's not an impossible task, even if it can feel that way sometimes, like the darkness will never lift. If you're in that place and it feels like that, we're here for you. We love to support you in whatever ways you need, but that's not who you are, right? So that's personalization. Number 3, professionalization. We see this a lot in leaders and people, and that can be just shift leaders, right? If you are working at the Taco Bell and you're the shift manager, this applies just as much to you as it does to a CEO. But it's saying, look, I'm not an anxious person, but like this just comes with the territory. I am going to be like this because there's no way to be successful in my job without just like being hypercritical of everybody and being anxious about the project being done on time. And that's what I need to get by. That is a desert experience. God wants peace for you, right? The ultimate state of being and flourishing at the end of time will not be some really successful, angel commander running around like a chicken with her head cut off. That's not who God made you to be. That's not the fullest version of who you are, made in the image of God. And so if you have been ascribing like, oh, well, again, disempowerment, it's just comes with the territory. That's accepting something, making an alliance with something you don't need to do. We don't need to do. We can instead pursue a different path. So that's professionalization. The last one, sexualization. Dr. Shirley explains this as the fastest numbing out technique, the fastest way to overload your brain, faster than your phone, although plenty of people use their phone for this purpose, but faster than some drugs is sliding into someone's DMs, is hitting up engaging in not necessarily healthy sexual activities, going to porn as a numbing technique, and it all makes sense. So because if we're in a place of pain and we're trying to distract, and scrolling through Facebook isn't doing it anymore, you need something more powerful to numb out. That makes sense as something that would totally overwhelm your whole brain and body, right? So we want to be conscious first off as people in the church to say, how about instead of shaming people for their habits, how about we ask, hey, what else is going on in your life? Is there anything that you're running from or trying to numb out from? But also, for us, we can check in with all 4 of these. Am I doing any of these things to try to avoid these desert places? We value whole, holistic flourishing. And so, are we engaging in problematization, personalization, professionalization, or sexualization? Good baseline. So what are we supposed to do instead? We aren't supposed to be doing any of those. Where are we going? What are healthy strategies of things to do? Well, second part of the research, how helpful. The 4 R's of trauma recovery, which I also think would apply even if you don't label it as trauma. Number 1, you could probably guess what number 1 is. The first R is relationship. We're going to look at this in the text later, but so many of us would love to stay in our little zone, especially people who are internal processors. We want to be perceived a certain way. We want to control how others perceive us. And so we want to work out all of our own crap in our own bubble. And then once we're in a wonderful place, then maybe we can go to our community and be like, hey, guess what? I'm doing great now, but I wasn't before. Let me tell you how terrible it was. No, being in trauma recovery, being able to get better is not, according to the research, something that you can do by yourself. You need to be in a relationship. Does that mean that when the grocery clerk says, how are you need to dump out all of your stuff? No, we can be intentional about the people with whom we ask to help share burdens, the people who we trust to steward that relationship well. Can be intentional about that, make sure it's an appropriate person, but we need to be in relationship in order to recover from these waste places, places of unhealth. Right? Okay, so that's the first R. The second R, I love, it is rhythm. And when I first read that, I was thinking, oh yeah, like rhythm of life. But no, it's not rhythm. It is literal bodily movement. Trauma recovery benefits enormously from things that are embodied. So EFT, tapping is starting to look at that research, right? People who engage in all these other cultures in a community dance environment, stuff that is moving your body, exercise, repetitive motion. There's lots of people who feel better after going running. We're not raising bottles for the 1000th. One of the main things that I'm going to remind us all of continually in our culture that we need to hear is you are also your body. Your body is not just bad in the way. Your body is a key, part of the key to wellness, to experiencing recovery, to experiencing Eden in your inner world, is engaging with your body. And according to the research, some of that is in dance. Some of it is in swinging, clapping. Some of it is in running. So try to find opportunities and don't call them, hokey if somebody tries to get you to engage in those practices. Rhythm, super fascinating. You can look like PubMed or other ResearchGate. You can find all sorts of really interesting things about how rhythm, engaging the body in repetitive motion, is essential for healing. Super fascinating. Super fascinating. Okay, number 3 is repetition. You see this all through the text. God is constantly telling his people to zachar, to repeat, to remember. So this is what cognitive behavioral therapy kind of helps people with, right? If you've had a traumatic thing and your brain does not know how to categorize it and like how to process it, repetition is the act of figuring out what the narrative is, what really happened there, and going over it. And in the text, in the Bible, God tells his people all the time, look, here's the narrative. You were once slaves, now you're free. Repeat that to yourself over and over and over. And because I'm free, I treat other people with full equal dignity, right? That's all through Torah. I was a slave, now I'm free. I was a slave, now I'm free. And so I treat other people also as free, continually. So that's part of trauma recovery. Repetition of the narrative. Does just repeating a bad narrative equal healing? No. You need to be intentional, and often with the guidance of a wise counselor, go through what happened and be able to have some insight on where our blind spots are. All right, the fourth thing, which is another kind of mystical thing, which some of us are very uncomfortable with. We would like just to be like, take your vitamins and stretch. I don't know. But the fourth one is ritual. Ritual. The fourth R of trauma recovery is a ritual. So that looks like saying, what is something very simple and something that is a physical act, again, right? Not just a mental act, that I can tie an intention to, and it carries meaning for me. So again, a lot of therapy, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, gives people like tasks to do, sometimes ritualized. If you have a lot of pain around the idea of relationship with God, right? Ritual is going to look like an intentional, meaning-laden way of approaching that situation, which helps you to heal from the past messages as you repeat a new narrative. Okay? I want us to try to play with that idea, and we'll get into that in further weeks. But first, I'm going to jump into the text and see if we can find all of this good stuff in the text. Guess where we're going? Exodus, we never escape. You think you're done? Just kidding. We're back in it again. Eternal tyranny of Exodus, chained in the dungeon of Torah. Just kidding. Exodus 15. We talked about this a little bit. This is right after the finale. We finished in Exodus 14, right? And we referenced some of the stuff going on here, but it's so good and it lines up so well. So, Exodus 15, super famous section, Song of the Sea, right? It's Miriam. They come out of the other side of this, of the Red Sea. Bodies floating in the water, horses gallop away alive. That's my hill to die on. Just kidding, probably. The people are on the other side and they're like, wow, this amazing miracle has happened. What do? They sing a song, and they repeat the narrative of what just happened, right? They say, I won't read the whole thing because it takes up most of the text, but it talks about, verse 13, for instance, says, with your faithful love, you will lead the people you have redeemed. You will guide them to your holy dwelling with your strength. It talks about how God redeemed them from their enemy, what he did to save them from the Egyptians and from slavery. It says that God will reign continually. So this is the work of which are repetition. They're coming up with a narrative, this traumatic, not just coming up with processing, coming up with makes it seem like it's disassociated from reality. We want to be in reality, right? Not just tell ourselves random things that are helpful. So they see what happened and they think, they go through the process, or Miriam and Moshe lead them in the process of saying, okay, that was God that did that. He cares for us. He's freeing us from slavery. He is the one leading us now, not Pero. Okay, so they're doing that work. They're doing the work of repetition. Fun fact, the Song of Miriam, or the Song of the Sea, which mysteriously deletes Miriam, is part of the morning services and modern Judaism. It's part of their morning prayer that they repeat every single day. Every single day, they zachar, they remember, okay, this is what happened. This is who we are. We are freed slaves. Therefore, let's walk like that and honor God in that way as someone who redeemed us from slavery. Okay, repetition. But not only that, verse 20 says, the prophetess Miriam, the sister of Aharon, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women came out following her with tambourines and dancing, right? So there we have the rhythm. So they're trying to work out this trauma that they've just experienced, like very like undeniably trauma, right? There was no customer service email vibes about that at all. Definitely trauma. And they repeat, and then they work it out in their holistic being through dancing, and then probably also through walking later. But maybe we should be people who dance more often than weddings and concerts. Just putting it out there. All right. The next thing is a relationship, right? They're very clearly in relationship the whole time. It's the people of Israel. The people of Israel come together and decide this. But the last R is ritual. And before we get to that, I want to look a little bit more closely at this next story, and then we'll be all done. So it says, and journeyed Moshe with Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out to the desert of Shur. Shur, who knows where Shur is? Shur comes from Genesis, and it is the place where Hagar, Abraham's mistress, servant, bad power dynamic, is when she is sent out basically to die in the desert by herself. So this is the place in Shur where people feel dispossessed, right? This is the motif that's been laid in by the author here, telling us very specifically where they are. For many of us deconstructing, that's kind of what our experience is like, right? We grew up in the church, it felt great and wonderful. Suddenly we started asking questions, maybe something happened in our life, and we slowly start to feel dispossessed, whether we were kicked out or we chose to leave on our own. Suddenly we're without our community and everything that we grew up around, and we feel out in the desert by ourselves, perhaps in a shur. Then it says, and they walked for 3 days in the desert, and they did not find water. So that's another part that can happen when we're deconstructing or just moving through trauma and suffering, right? Is feeling like 3 days without water in the desert. Been there. I got like heat stroke on my heat exhaustion, whichever one's not as serious. Got on my first day out in the desert when I went to Israel for the first time. Cannot imagine 3 days without water. And for some of us, we've been in depression for so long. We've been in anxiety for so long, confusion, PTSD, not sure what's going on. It feels like we've been in the desert for 3 days without water, at least 3 days. And they came to Mara, and they could not drink the water at Mara because it was bitter. That's why it's called Mara. It's in there. The word mar just means bitter. And the people grumbled to Moshe. I think that's a little bit of a judgy translation. I would not choose grumbled, but the people in their discontent said to Moshe, what are we going to drink? Right? So you get to a water. This often can also happen in the non-linear process of healing. You get to a thing and you think that it's finally going to be better. And then you get there, and because you're still numbed out or you're still struggling, it's not magically better, and it's the worst. You're like, I thought this was the moment. I thought that I was going to have deliverance here. I thought that freedom was on the other side of this medicine or this therapist, and here I am still exactly the same. So he cried out to Yahweh, and the Lord, Yahweh, caused him to see a tree. And he sent, that's a motif from the Exodus series, he sent to the water, presumably the tree. He sent the tree to the water, and the water became sweet. Okay, there's a lot there. some of the Jewish comment on this section says that God just gave Moshe a quick botany and chemistry lesson, and he showed him a tree and was like, if you put this in the water, it'll purify the water. That'd be awesome. I don't know about trees that can do that, but maybe they exist. I don't know everything. It's not the most compelling theory to me, but maybe you love it. God is botanist. Sounds, yeah, there's room for that. But so God causes Moshe to see a tree, and it's Moshe's idea. It doesn't say that God told him to stick the tree in the water. It says that he was like, cool, hopefully this will do it. And he dunks it in the water. There's lots of questions that we can ask there, that we can wrestle with on our own time, maybe in discussion. Be like, is this tree supposed to be like the tree of life? What's going on? What compelled Moshe to try sticking it in the water? But God says, here's the tree. And Moshe takes the initiative, an important part in our healing, right? Very few times in our healing will it happen where we're just kind of lying there and do absolutely nothing and never say yes to anything. But ta-da, we'll just suddenly feel better. Nope, there's some work required, and sometimes that work is probably cutting down a tree and chucking it in a body of water, which is what Moshe does. Okay, and it says, and the Lord made a statute and an ordinance. It actually says something cut, something engraved, so kind of like a commandment, and the mishpat, which is something that a judge says, so a decree, a legal decree. And he tested them there, which is a whole thing that we'll circle back to. Verse 26, he said, if you listen/obey to the voice of Adonai, your God, and you do what is upright in his eyes, and you do what you have heard. I'm translating as I talk here, so that's why I'm going slower. And his commandments, and that which he has given you to guard, and all of the things he has engraved, I will not send you illness. Specifically, what illness? That sounds dangerous. The kind that I placed upon the Egyptians. Interesting. For I am Adonai, I am Yahweh, the healer of you. Okay, so there's a lot there. Translation, if you don't have your Bible open, that's not so literal. If you will carefully obey the Lord your God, do what is right in his sight, pay attention to his commandments, keep his statutes, I will not inflict any illness on you that I inflicted on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. Okay, so what's really interesting to me about that section is I will not afflict any illnesses on you that I inflicted on the Egyptians. Seems to be speaking to a specific fear that the Israelite people had, right? Because it says God showed Moshe a tree. Moshe throws the tree into the water and it becomes sweet, but it doesn't say that all the people drink of it, right? So maybe God shows up because he's saying, hey, look, you're citizen of my kingdom now. If you are going to treat one another with equity and love and all the other things that we see in the legal code, it will go well for you. And specifically, I am not going to do the same thing that you just saw done to the other people, right? Totally reasonable request. Reasonable fear is, hey, is that God's character? Is he a God that just like steamrolls people with a ton of like boils and all sorts of things that happen to them? Locusts, frogs, bloody water. Is that just like God's character? Super chaotic. They haven't been telling each other the stories of God that we have in Genesis and the scroll of Bereshit. That's totally a reasonable concern. So God shows up after they haven't had the water yet, and he says, I am not going to do to you what I did to the ones who are oppressing you. It's going to be okay. Very important for us to know. He says, I'm the God who heals you, who mends you, who sews you back up. see image behind that. And then they go to Elim, where there's 12 springs and 70 date palms. So where's the ritual in that? Well, he says very specifically, if you follow the statute, the commandment that I've given you to guard, the key there is to guard. And I know it's not really in the English because, insert Elle's complaints about translations there. But to guard, the very next story, we hear what he's given them to guard, and it is, guess, Shabbat. So he gives them, in the midst of them not being sure of what the character of God is. Is he this chaotic, destructive force in the world, or is he a nurturing healer? He reminds them and lays down the law of Shabbat, of rest. There's that's a wonderful category of sermon to dive into if you're not familiar with what's Shabbat, but it's God's idea, God's setup that after 6 days of work, we take a day to remind labor, accomplishments, perfection, striving, job, career, money, worldly status is not who we are. And we're invited to rest and remembering that we are still good, that God is still good, and the world is still good. So we don't need to do XYZ. So that's the ritual that he gives them to do as a whole people in relationship with each other. So in the coming weeks, we're going to re-look at what are some rituals, right? What are some spaces that we can create with intention, with meaning that help us re-navigate this relationship with God in healthy ways, right? Because we have lots of unhealthy ways. I'm sure we all have stories, if you grew up in the church, ways to do that. So we're going to look at healthier ways to do that in the coming weeks. I'm so excited. So I'm going to pray and let us go, and I look forward to talking to you guys in discussion, 7:30 p.m. Sunday, Zoom link. If you want to join us, fill out the form online on our website, link in the description. We'd love to see you there. Here's prayer. God, I thank you that we do not need to turn to problematization, professionalization, personalization, or sexualization, all these different ways of disempowering ourselves, of numbing ourselves out, of just accepting that things are crappy right now. I thank you that you're a good parent, that you don't want us to just be fine, that you want us to be able to flourish, that you made us in your image to be a creative, authentically powerful force in the world, capable of bringing healing and light and your character to the world. I ask that you would mend us up in all these desert places and help bless discussion, bless the conversations that we have with our friends, with our spouses, with ourselves, that we might come out the other side of this series more whole, more flourishing, and more able to enjoy the amazing, beautiful world that you have given us. I ask all these things in the name of your son, Jesus. Amen. Another thing you can do on that website is to give. There's a little button in the bottom left corner. We would so appreciate if you chose to tithe with us, to give for us. That would be a huge blessing. You don't even know. Discussion questions are in the PDF and the link. I'll see you guys next week.